On today's episode of the podcast, I sit down with Ian Harris, Chief Executive of the WSET. In this, the 50th anniversary of the Trust, we discuss the events taking place to mark this milestone. We hear his origin story and transition into current role. Discuss 17 years of changes. And look ahead to future trends in the industry. Enjoy.
My name's Ian Harris, and I now run the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, and I've been CEO for 17 years. I've been in the wine industry and the spirit industry for 42 years since I left university. My background prior to going to university didn't involve wines or spirits, the occasional pint of beer, obviously. But my seminal moment of why I joined the wine industry was when I was living in France. I did a degree in French, and I needed to spend a year abroad, and I asked my tutor at London University where I should go because I wanted to continue playing rugby. I was a very keen rugby player. So I applied for and got a posting at a school just south of Bordeaux. As a result of that, I met a lot of people who were involved in the wine industry. So a lot of the pupils that I was teaching, I was an assistant teacher, a lot of my pupils' parents were involved in the wine industry. And third week of October 1975, I went to a dinner invited by one of my fellow teachers to a vineyard in the Sauternes area just south of Bordeaux. That dinner started at 7 o'clock in the evening. At about 11 o'clock in the evening, we went out into the vineyards, and the owner of the vineyard set fire to some of the cuttings that he'd done, having just pruned the vines and cooked steaks over the fire. We went back into the chateau, and at 1 o'clock I ambled my way home. And I remember writing a postcard to my mother the next morning, having gone to France with the intention of becoming a teacher. That was what I wanted to do. And I wrote my mother a postcard way before the days of email saying, not sure about teaching. The wine trade seems like a much more fun idea. So that was the start of it, really. So I then came back to the UK to do my final exams of my French degree, applied for a job with a wine company called Christopher's, who no longer exists. They were part of Waverley Vintners at the time. And I wrote one letter to this company. I got a letter back saying, would I like to come in for an interview? So I went out and bought a suit, because I didn't even own a suit. Went for an interview with Christopher's just off Jermyn Street. And at the end of that interview, an hour later, I was offered a job. Earning not very much money, it has to be said, because in the late 70s, the wine trade was very much the domain of people who had either a private income or had come from a certain background where wine was part of their DNA. But for me, it was great to get my foot in the door. After about a month, I went to my boss and said, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to resign because I can't afford to work anymore. I'm just about earning enough to pay my train fare to get up to London and pay my mother a bit of housekeeping money. So he gave me a 25% salary increase, but a 25% of not very much is still not very much, but it was enough to keep me in the company. I worked for Waverley, who were the holding company of Christopher's, for 10 years. And then in 1987, I joined Seagram, big multinational spirits company. And I was with Seagram from 1987 until 2002, when they were taken over by Diageo and Pernod Ricard, and my career progressed through sales roles, marketing roles, and my final role was marketing director and commercial director of Seagram UK in 2002. When they were taken over by Diageo and Pernod Ricard, we were all scattered to the four winds, and it coincided exactly at the time when my predecessor at the WSET was just about to retire. So I contacted one of the trustees of the WSET to express my interest in taking over. His reaction was, well, we can't afford you, dear boy. You're a corporate person. We couldn't possibly afford the sort of salary that you'd expect. And my answer to that was, A, you don't know what salary I'm expecting. B, if my package was based on achieving results and growing the WSET as opposed to a base salary, then everybody wins. Long and short of it was I had an interview, a fairly unstructured interview, it has to be said, And at the end of that interview, I produced a draft business plan for the people who were interviewing me, and they were the trustees of the WSET at the time. And clearly they must have been impressed, because having been told at the end of the interview, "Thank you very much, Ian, we've got a few more people to see, we should be able to get back to you by the end of the week," I drove home from the interview, and an hour later, as I was pulling into my house, my phone rang, and it was the chairman of the trustees saying, "Ian, I'd like to take you out for lunch next Monday." So I knew he wasn't taking me out for lunch to tell me I'd screwed up the interview. So I was offered the position of CEO of the WSET in March 2002, and took over the reins of the WSET at the end of April 2002. And since then, it's just been a real blast, to be honest. We weren't in great shape in 2002 financially. So we're an educational charity. So we were at the time very much reliant on particularly the Vintners Company, where our offices were, paying a peppercorn rent. But I could see the potential for education, not just in the UK, but around the world. So we started, the first thing I did was to impress on people that I knew in the trade the importance of education, particularly in wine, because as we know, the average price of a bottle of wine, not just in the UK but around the world, is pretty low. The margins for the producer, for the distributor, for the wholesaler, even for the retailer, sometimes are pretty minimal, and sometimes even making a loss. And from my perspective, I was always banging on to whoever was prepared to listen, that the more the consumer and the person who is serving the consumer at the point of sale, whether it's a barman, a sommelier, someone behind the counter in a wine store, the more everybody knows about wines and spirits, the more they will be prepared to pay. And if the consumer is prepared to pay more on a glass of wine in a restaurant or a bottle of wine in a shop, everybody wins. There's more margin for everybody. And so education as a driver of business is something that I continue to preach to anybody who's prepared to listen. So, and from that perspective, our growth internationally has really been born on the back of big companies who understand that education should be seen as part of their marketing budget, not part of their overhead budget, which can be cut at a whim.
I think it's really interesting, thinking back to April 2002 and thinking about the state of things like the internet and travel, all the changes really that we've seen across 17 years, quite remarkable. And I'm just curious to almost get you to kind of compare and contrast a little bit. You mentioned about coming in here with a vision, with an idea about the potential, really, about the education and the reach that it might have, not just in the UK, but also globally. And I'm just curious, how has that sort of played out across those 17 years, and how different has it become from where you thought it might have been going when you first joined?
I think the advent of the internet and digital communication generally has changed the world, and certainly when it comes to WSET and the educational efforts that we make. In the 1990s, they were called lectures. In the 2000s, we are definitely teachers rather than lecturers. But when I was doing my lectures in the 1990s for WSET, it was on acetates, so old-fashioned way of putting something up on a screen. Now, of course, everything is done digitally using PowerPoint or with enhanced with videos. And similarly, the learning materials. When I started in 2002, it was books. It was books, and it was someone standing in the front of a classroom. Now, most of our student materials are online, they're digital. The communication that we have with our students, of course, and our past students is something that we can now do, which we could never do 17 years ago. So we keep in touch, particularly with our diploma alumni. And this year, coincidentally, being our 50th anniversary, we're also going to have our 10,000th diploma graduate. So it's quite a big moment on that. Some of them, sadly, may not still be around in the 50 years we've been around. But for us, our diploma alumni are really important. They're the best ambassadors we can have because they've been through our programs. And a lot of them are now in very senior positions within the industry. So we keep very, very close contact with our alumni, which of course we could never do in the days before digital communication and the internet. So basically, online learning is the other part. Everybody is time poor these days. Nobody's got enough time to time or wherewithal to sit in a classroom. So although classroom courses are still very, very important, and you can't taste unless you do it physically, but you can still learn digitally. So our online learning is something that we're investing very heavily in a new content management system for our learning platform, because people want to learn while they're driving their car, or while they're on the train, or at home sitting in a chair with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and just have it streamed into their ear. So a lot has changed in 17 years, not just because of the digital age coming of age, but more importantly the fact that many markets, which certainly when I joined the trade, or even when I joined the WSET, just weren't important. China being the biggest one. In 2006, we had 50 students in a year. In 2006, in 2019, we'll have over 18,000 just in mainland China alone. So the burgeoning markets who are discovering wine and want to learn about wine is one reason why we've grown, but obviously the digital age and all the opportunities that presents to us is the other way that we're able to leverage the need for education.
Yeah, fascinating to look back on trends, I'm sure, and I'm sure we'll hear lots of those other trends and lots of those other observations over time. I'm also just curious, almost to ask a follow-up question on that, really, because I guess there again, kind of mirroring your own structure of the celebrations. There we've sort of looked back and seen the growth from 50 to 18,000, and kind of now know what that represents. And education, and I guess the business of education, has always really fascinated me, because I think you've almost got that kind of canary in the coal mine effect, where you're right at the forefront. You're potentially seeing what's going to really come online and what's really going to change in terms of the industry, maybe 2-3 years ahead of time, when you look at people's sign-up rate, when you look at what people are asking you, what's coming out of that communication. And I'm just wondering, is there perhaps a little bit of an update there in terms of what trends you've really seeing, like right up to date, that you think, oh, these might be actually things that we're seeing first here in the WSET and are potentially going to be coming online in wider in the industry going forward?
I think we're in the happy situation where, because we're the biggest at what we do in terms of education and also qualifications, so a WSET qualification is something that people want to have on their CV when they're applying for a job. But in terms of the new developments that are happening in the world, we're in a position where we have generic bodies, so country producers, knocking on our door saying, hey, why haven't you got Georgian wines on your syllabus? And why haven't you got Chinese wines on your syllabus? The WSET syllabus for each of our qualifications it's a global syllabus. So wines and spirits have to have a certain global reach and global traction before they'll find a space on our syllabus. And once they achieve a certain scale globally, then they come onto our syllabus. So from that perspective, we are getting early, I wouldn't say early warning, but early notification of countries that are making a real effort to expand their wine offerings into global businesses. For example, Chinese wines, which it was a bit of a joke, to be honest, even 10 years ago. Now they're producing some fantastic wines, and it's got such a huge scale, and there's a lot of investment going in there, that certainly in 10 years from now, it won't be unusual to be ordering a Chinese wine in a smart restaurant as opposed to a French wine. We've already seen the trend towards New World from when I joined the trade in 1977. Pretty much every white tablecloth restaurant you went into, the wine list would have been 95% French. Might have had a couple of Italians in there. But what we're seeing is a trend for wines from all around the world, which are well made. And I think these days you can't put any old rubbish onto a wine list or onto a shelf. It's just not going to move. But there are many countries in the world, in Asia, in South America, and in Eastern Europe, countries that you wouldn't dream of having a place in the global industry, that are putting a real investment into trying to develop export markets and a global market for their products. And we do get a bit of an early notice of that.
Feels great to be here. 2019, the 50th anniversary of the founding of the WSET. I know you've got an exciting series of events and promotions, I think, taking place this year to celebrate that. So, yeah, just give us a flavour of that. And I think also, given the global nature of the WSET, a sense of how people can get involved all around the world.
Well, the main feature that we've got in September, which was actually 4 weeks before we were officially founded, so the WSET actually came into being on the 17th of October 1969. But a month prior to that, we've got Wine Education Week, and that's going to run all over the world. So that's going to be in 40 different countries. The WSET is already represented in 75 countries, but not every country is going to be getting involved. But there will be over 200 centres that are going to be running events around the world across 40 countries, and there's going to be over 400 events taking place just that particular week. So obviously you can turn up to an event physically, but there will be a lot of social media that goes around it as well. And so we're encouraging we've got over 800 centres dotted around the world. Not all of them are able or indeed willing to do an event, but those that are, we're encouraging them to do as much as possible. And this is very much aimed at the consumer rather than the trade. So to expand the knowledge of WSET and the fact that you can learn about wine and you can get a certificate which gives you a qualification. And so we've got a target of reaching over 5,000 participants over the week. So in London we're trying to create the biggest wine tasting in the world, which is a surprisingly low number. So we think we might achieve it. But and what we've produced a toolkit so that centres can run events, and it can be something as simple as basic food and wine matching. It's any event that will attract people who up until now haven't got involved in any formal or indeed informal wine event. So that's the biggest event that we're running during the year. And the Future 50 Awards, that was really having looked back at education and looked back at the 50 years since WSET was founded, and then an emphasis in the middle of the year of just raising the profile of WSET. We felt it was really important, as we're celebrating the 50th anniversary, to look at the next 50 years. And it's very much a people business that we work in. And so what we've come up with is an awards called the Future 50 Awards, and that's about asking people to nominate younger people, and we've specified it's under 40s, so you and I are counted out of that one, sadly, but younger people who the industry believe are going to be the movers and shakers of this industry over the next 50 years. I'm one of the judges on this, and we will be looking through 650 nominations for people who have been nominated as part of the Future 50 Awards. And they come from 44 different countries. So this isn't just UK. And they're pretty evenly split, actually, across the regions where the WSET operates. So the Americas, Europe, UK obviously, but also Asia Pacific. So it's a broad global initiative which we're very excited about, and I think it'll raise the awareness of the importance of wine education, but also give a lot of people who are at the start of their careers the opportunity to raise their profile as they develop their careers in this industry.
It's been a really interesting conversation with you. I mean, I feel like I could stay here all day and, ping loads of questions at you all day and crack open some wine. But no, unfortunately not. But yeah, I just like to really, throw open the door. I mean, I know you've looked forward, a little bit about the trends. You've spoken about Chinese wine. You've spoken about what's happening for the rest of 2019. Really, just anything else. Perhaps looking, slightly further into the future than 2019, and maybe in the next decade or so. What are the sorts of things that you see in your crystal ball?
As an industry, we need to be aware of the dangers of alcohol. We have social responsibility as part of all our courses because we're very conscious that sadly some people do abuse alcohol, and that's something that we are completely against. So hence we would rather people spent a bit more money and had quality rather than quantity when it comes to alcohol. So I think there's going to be over the next few years a real turn towards non-alcoholic and low alcoholic alternatives to not just wines but also beers and spirits. And you've got brands like Seedlip coming on, which are, they don't actually market themselves as non-alcoholic gin, but everybody talks about them as non-alcoholic spirits. Low alcohol wine is a tough one because most of the low alcohol wines that I've tasted taste like fizzy grape juice. Beers, I think beers have got it right. I've tasted some very good low alcohol beers. So I think there's definitely going to be a move towards lower alcohol, because it's important that alcohol isn't demonized the way that tobacco has been demonized in many countries around the world. So I think if I had a crystal ball and I was looking at it in 20 years' time, I think the wine industry there will be more consolidation in the industry because smaller producers are struggling to make any money. So consolidation is something that's bound to happen in the way that it's happened in the beer industry and the way that it's happened in the soft drinks industry. But there are entrepreneurs who are willing to try something different, and I think that's the exciting thing about this industry at the moment. In the 1990s, the big companies who were the big retailers were dominating everything, and suddenly now we've got some really exciting entrepreneurs who are doing great things both in restaurants and in selling wine, and I think the same is going to happen in terms of production. There are always going to be people who have the interest and want to invest in trying to start something up. So yes, there will be consolidation, but I hope that there will continue to be the entrepreneurs who buck the trend and introduce some fascinating wines and spirits and indeed beers into what is still a huge market.
Thank you so much to Ian. Really great to talk, and really looking ahead to all the events that the WSET has got planned. The best place to find out more is on the WSET website, and I've included the link below, along with details of their social media handles. If you haven't already, do please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. This is the only way to be updated when new episodes are launched. I have got a number of exciting series planned for the coming weeks and months, which I'm sure you're going to want to hear. And of course, do follow along with me on social media. I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.